All right, here we go. Episode 2, Lie-Abetes. We're back with Dedunking. Episode 2 is going to be concerned with the origins of Atlantis or Lost Civilization hunting and an accusation of racism. Yeah, an accusation of racism. Um, let's go ahead with this opening statement.
It's like he didn't count on anybody that knew any of this stuff actually weighing in. But I've been researching this a lot lately, and I kind of care if my beliefs, are inherently racist or not. And lo and behold, hyper-diffusionism is not.
Well, I'm glad you've done your research, but we know from past examples that's probably going to be some really iffy research. And if you did any, it's going to be very selective, very subjective. It's going to be cherry picking. It's going to be tailored to fit what it is that you're trying to argue. I find it interesting that you say in this clip that people, wouldn't look stuff up. Well, Dan, we're going to do that to you today, buddy. We're going to do that to you today. Dan is of the opinion that hyperdiffusion is not racism. We're gonna show you the complete history of that and how Atlantis hunting and Lost Civilization hunting has been used. It is very much racist. Dan has said in previous videos, multiple as a matter of fact, that Atlantis hunting was created in the 1800s by a couple of discredited persons. We'll review the information to see if that's true. I'm going to give you a big hint. No. Dedunking claims that the modern search for Atlantis in America rests in the work of two discredited persons by the name of Dibbles and Plongeon. He makes this claim to fend off accusations of racism from academics and the public at large concerning modern pseudoscience in Atlantis and lost civilizations, such as himself and others. So basically, is such a claim true? The Atlantis hunting born from archaeology is stated by Dedunking. A brief condensed historic overview is presented to prove the Dedunking claim false, while demonstrating yet again that Dedunking cherry picks information to weave specific narratives that pleases pseudoscience, alternate history theory perspective. We'll use several clips and quotes. Let's go ahead and listen to this guy.
And this is the issue. When people go to an academic for information, and that information is so twisted up that it leads to them making erroneous conclusions, that's a problem. And when I tell Flint numerous times that this is happening, he just says he doesn't care. He knows that people are walking away, academics are walking away from what he says with the wrong take, and he gives zero shits.
Well, the problem with that is that if Dan is trying to tell Flint inaccurate information, which I'm sure that he is, yeah, we don't care. We don't want to hear propaganda. We don't want to hear your truncated histories to try and alleviate you of any responsibility that you have for your beliefs. Atlantis hunting and lost civilization hunting has been with us for quite some time, and we know the results of it. We know how it has been used. Why would he pay you any attention? Why would any of us pay you any attention? We're not up for your bullshit. We've heard this. We remember junior high, high school, college, graduate school, and PhDs. We're not falling for it, Dan. Well, let's hear the rest of this.
And this is the issue. When people go to an academic for information, and that information is so twisted up that it leads to them making erroneous conclusions, that's a problem. And when I tell Flint numerous times that this is happening, he just says he doesn't care. He knows that people are walking away, academics are walking away from what he says with the wrong take, and he gives zero shits. He attributes the origins of modern Atlantis hunting to Ignatius Donnelly, a man who was very much a white supremacist. But he knows for a fact that he didn't start modern Atlantis hunting. Flint knows it was started by Charles Etienne Brazier de Bourbourg and Augustus Le Plongeon, both of who believed the Maya were the superior culture after the Great Flood. Flint just doesn't care if this gets lost or not. He has no problem removing the credit for the work from these two archaeologists. Instead, he attributes it to Ignatius Donnelly so that he can claim that the origins of Atlantis hunting are racist.
Okay. As we can see right there off the bat. So he's trying to pin Flint into a corner regarding when Atlantis hunting, Lost Civilization hunting started. He wants to blame it on a couple guys that were just total losers. They were losers in their time. They were made fun of in their time. They were discredited in their time. They were laughed at in their time. Dan wants to try and paint them as serious guys, serious folk, non-racist folk. Both of these guys were, they had some racist comments. We'll read them when we get to that section. But again, this is just propaganda, and it's not based on his research. I find it hard to believe again in this situation that he would be able to miss all the stuff that we're going to show you. It's just a desire to try and hang something on somebody's neck, to make things up, to make them look bad, and it's really unfair that Dan does these kind of things. Let's go to the next slide. So we'll cover these 3 points here. Are academics walking away with the wrong take or information, or is dedunking creating mythology? Does Flint or other researchers attribute modern Atlantis hunting, lost civilizations to Ignatius Donnelly? Does Flint blindly attach Graham Hancock to Ignatius Donnelly so he can claim Atlantean hunting is racist? Basically, guys, we're going to have to go back to high school. 9th grade, 10th grade. I think all of us remember history, sociology, our literature classes. People in Europe are going to remember their history classes, their literature classes. And when somebody says modern Atlantis hunting started in the 1800s, you got to kind of cock your head sideways, because we all remember those classes. And we're like, what? What's this guy talking about? So let's begin with a quick overview here. So 1451, 1506, Christopher Columbus discovers America. At 1492, at that instance, when he actually discovers land across the Atlantic Ocean, right? The Americas become North, Central, Southern America becomes Atlantis for a lot of people. This is actually when all the BS starts. You have a bunch of Europeans, they run into a bunch of property people that they have no knowledge of, no history. It's not even covered in their Bible. How do you explain this? Wow, right? Wow, how do you explain this? So it starts immediately. This lost civilization, Atlantis hunting, it starts immediately. They do not wait until the 1800s. Marsilio Ficino, 1433 to 1499, a Renaissance philosopher, wrote that Atlantis was real. Although he had many detractors, others of his time would see the New World as Atlantis. And that's important to remember. We're going to name some big people in history here, but there's thousands more that we're not going to cover. They were writing books, articles, they're at their church, wherever, okay? There's rumor mills all over the place, and not all of them are remembered. Not all of them are in print. But at least Ficino here is remembered. And it's the detractors that are important. Through this entire thing, just remember in the background that there are legitimate, serious people in society telling these guys to knock it off, that this is bullshit. Nobody wants your stories, to knock it off. And they won't. And that continues today. So just keep that in the back of your mind. There's people saying, don't do this. Don't do it. Let's continue. Gonzalo Valdez, a Spanish historian, concluded that Atlantis was the Hesperides Island, originally discovered by King Hesper, and thus God had endorsed the retaking of lands and peoples that were just Spanish descendants anyway. Atlantis was seen as evidence of pre-Columbian migration, and we can conclude the 10 lost tribes of Israel. So right at the beginning of when America is discovered, You can see the political nature of wanting to claim property that isn't yours being politicized. You're trying to legitimize what it is that you're doing. So people are creating stories to make it okay for them to take property, take wealth, natural resources, take slaves, whatever it is they want to do. They're going to start telling these stories to link themselves to a land and people that is not theirs. Starts immediately. Next slide. Francisco Gomorrah, 1553, stated that Atlantis and the New World were the same thing. I.e., Plato had heard of the New World and told his tale, and that it just simply morphed into the idea of the Atlanteans escaping from their sinking island and populating the New World, and it gained traction because it was felt to account for the great wealth of some of the peoples there, particularly in Mexico. And this is from Kershaw 2018. I will actually link this book in the description. It's a free book that you can read online, and he covers much more of this. Again, it's not all of the players. He just covers the big ones. It's an interesting read. It will quickly get you away from the whole notion of this Atlantis hunting was invented in the 1800s. But let's continue. Let's hammer this home. Diego Landa. Oh, everybody remembers this guy, right? So this is the Spanish bishop that was burning all the Maya books and churches and other religious things. Trying to get these guys to convert. Some of the old people of the Yucatan say that they had heard from their ancestors that this land was occupied by a race of people who came from the east and whom God had delivered by opening 12 paths through the sea. If this were true, it necessarily follows that all the inhabitants of the Indies are descendants of the Jews. The lost tribes linking Atlantis to Maya lands. We'll see later on that Brasseur de Bourg will add to this story. But it just needs to be pointed out. They're not inventing new things. They're building on old stuff. Overall, Diego Landa unleashed a torrent of pseudo-scientific speculation that still occurs quite regularly today, and it is striking how much some of the current pro-Atlanta speculation owes to the ideas to which he and his 16th century contemporaries subscribed. Again, see Kershaw for that quote. In 1561, the French scholar Guillaume Postel suggested that either North or South America should be named Atlantis. So in 1561, they just want to name like all of it Atlantis, some of it Atlantis. You're going to see Atlantis names all over in Central and South America. You're going to see Atlantis names in China, South China Sea, the Philippines, Indonesia, the Indian Ocean, North Africa, Central Africa. This stuff pops up all over because it seems wherever people wanted to travel and just kind of take over stuff, take over people, take over whatever the hell they wanted to do, they would do it through the guise of, oh, you're just our cousins, or oh, we owned this land before. Have you heard this story of Atlantis? Did you know that you were just a lost tribe? And so this is this mythological hook that they're using, trying to pull it into reality to take advantage of people. Sarmiento Gamboa, 1572, told Philip II of Spain that long ago Atlantis, i.e. America, had been next to Europe, and so it belonged to the king by divine right. So we see these political conversations, these making up of reasons to go ahead and just use mythology as a source of power structure to justify what it is these guys wanted to do. Dr. John Dee, 1527 to 1608, in his unpublished manuscript entitled The Limits of the British Empire, he used a legendary or mythological material to justify British claims of a sun-dry foreign region discovered, inhabited, and partly These foreign regions included North America. And the Queen's royal title also extended to all the coasts and lands beginning or about Florida. See how this works? Take this mythological story of Atlantis, you incorporate it into your civil government structure, and you just start claiming things. Atlantis had now been relocated in the British eyes from Spanish-controlled Caribbean to North America and claimed by the British. Giving birth, and this is where this gets really important later on, giving birth to the white Madoc Welsh Indians of America who colonized Atlantis 300 years before Columbus. This is the start of the mound builders. This is where you get white Welsh Indians in Northeast America. These are the people that they're going to ascribe or say or tell or lie about and say are the actual mound builders and not the Native Americans. Plato's Atlantis had become a neat explanation for the Indian cultures of the Americas. It was almost taken for granted that these cultures couldn't have it was almost taken for granted that these cultures couldn't have developed on their own. But on the other hand, it was hard to trace them back to any civilization from the old world. Meaning, they didn't have any records for them, right? So it just kind of pumps up this lost tribe, lost people issue. And it's just wide open for lies. It's just wide open. Because again, they're trying to rationalize all this stuff in their heads, and they can't. It's a blank spot, and that's just what really perpetuates the mythology and the lies that lead to the crimes. Duran, 1537-1588. Duran claims that the Toltecs were disciples of the high priest Topiltzin, and his disciples were said to have preached and performed miracles. Astonished, the people called these men Toltecs, which Duran says means masters or men wise in some craft. Duran speculated that this Topiltzin may have been the Apostle Thomas. Yeah. Berzier de Bourbourg will convert the Toltec into Atlanteans, and he doesn't mean the brown folk that he sees there. So anyway, so here we are in 1537, 1588. Diego Duran, Dominican Diego Duran, he's got the Apostle Thomas there, and he's got his disciples as the Toltecs, and they're moving all over North and Central America doing stuff because the Apostle Thomas had to show up and make sure that they were Christians and they were learning how to do stuff, construction stuff. Yeah. So just to hit this point home, this BS didn't start in the 1800s. It started in the beginning. So Sir Francis Bacon, and I think everybody remembers this guy from junior high. You had to at least read some pages from this gentleman. And specifically what we're referring to here is Atlantis is America in his essay New Atlantis, published in 1627. He argues that the ancient wisdom is lost. It is destroyed. Atlantis was in Central America, according to him. It was destroyed, and then all the survivors take off to Bensalem, which is in the Pacific Ocean. Yeah. And again, this is from, late, ninth grade, junior high education level here. When I first heard Dan say that Atlantis hunting, lost civilization hunting, didn't start until the 1800s, you kind of get that kink in your neck trying to figure out what he's saying, because you remember that isn't true. It's 1561. Thomas Bacon. I'm sorry, 1627 is when that was published. But let's continue. Let's just see how many more of these guys that we have prior to the 1800s. John Swain, 1635. That America was sometimes part of the great land which Plato calls the Atlantic island, and that the kings of that island had some intercourse between the people of Europe and Africa. All this was still difficult to square with European history and religious institutions. And I think that one of Dan's contentions as well, he'll sometimes add it, is that the Atlanteans that Dibbles or Plongeon will talk about, he says, oh, well, they're the first ones to say that the Maya went to Europe and Africa and the other portions of the world. Well, no, people said it before them. It's nothing new. The only thing those guys are going to do is add deeper and more intricate levels of lies and BS on top of what's already been recorded by these other folks. So Antonio Pinello, 1589 to 1660, wrote Paradise in the New World. Garden of Eden was Central or South America, and all the world's people and cultures spread from there. So, and this is probably pretty interesting because by 1660, we already had folks such as Pinello claiming the religious side of this, just like some others were claiming the Apostle Thomas. Well, what we've got now is the Garden of Eden. I believe he originally said it was somewhere near Brazil. Don't quote me on that. Garden of Eden was somewhere in Brazil, and then everybody spreads out from there. So here's your mother culture, right? And then it spreads out to the rest of the world. So when you hear Dan say, you know, they were the first one. Okay, next. Isaac Pierre, his pre-Adamite theory equals the chosen people came from Adam and Eve. The Gentiles, on the other hand, are the descendants of humans created before Adam. That's where you get the pre-Adamites, people before Adam and Eve. This is part of Plongeon beliefs. Must have been a problem for him being descended from Jews, so he's going the Atlantis route, people before Adam and Eve. And it's really just white collar versus blue collar talk, if you will. A lot of people, when they hide racism, the blue collars will say things very abrasively and just forthright. Whereas white collars tend to hide racism. It's more structural, it's more structural. They're not going to say anything directly to your face, but they will make sure you don't get good jobs and you live in the shitty neighborhoods and you get shitty schools, that sort of thing. And so that's really what's going on here. You've got pre-Adamites just because they don't want to be related to another religious group that they don't like. Gross. Fernando Zoquital, 1578 to 1650. Language wandering from Israelite Babylon to Huehue Tlapalan. Probably got that wrong. A bearded white race that came from the Northeast. Mound builders of America, the Toltecs. Borg transforms these guys into the Atlanteans. So again, Dan has publicly stated that these two archaeologists were the ones that, created modern Atlantis, Lost Civilization hunting. But right here we can see these guys are just building on themselves, one layer of BS after the other. And so now we've got the acceptance of these white guys in Northeast America, these bearded white Indians. They are the Toltecs. They now live in a place called Huehue, and they're in Central America. They're in Mexico. They're down there. They're doing stuff. They're moving and shaking. They're teaching the world the stuff that local people couldn't teach themselves. Borg will read about this. He will see this, and he will just run with it. He didn't invent anything. He didn't come up with anything original. What he's going to do that's original has nothing to do with this already existing story, but we'll talk about that when we get there. Let's move slightly out of the range of the Atlanteans and the religious aspects of lost civilization hunting. This gentleman here, Olaf Rudbeck, 1630 to 1702, he figured out that, hey, maybe if you're attaching yourself to Atlantis, you could just be seen as a great people, right? And so what he does is he relocates Atlantis to Uppsala, near Uppsala, Sweden, to declare Gothic pride and wisdom. Atlantis started down the path of nationalism. Again, from Kershaw, we'll post that up in the thing. And if you remember history, you can see where this is going to go. And this is from, the 1600s, where this ends up in the 1900s, right? This Atlantis, nationalism, these are our people, we're great. We taught the world all of this stuff. Civilization without us would have been impossible. Let's continue on, though. We'll bring this back to more Atlantis hopping around the globe. Giovanni Carli, 1720 to 1795, combined Italian myths with musings on America and links the Mediterranean with America. Strange enough, Borg will include this as well. Folks from the East and West. He will actually proclaim that things he's reading in Central America are also written Delphi, Greece. Yeah. Crazy shit. So by this time, and I think we already mentioned it, nothing was more common in America than the names related to Atlantis or Antaeus, especially in Central America. It's ridiculous. If you look at a map now, this stuff is all over there. John Francis Carreri, 1651 to 1725, an Italian adventurer who was perhaps the first to link Egypt and Amerindians descended from Atlantis. Not Borg or Plongeon. Carreri. It was Carreri. This is the first guy that's thinking these are the two locations of Atlantis. Either these guys went over to Egypt or Egypt went over there. But that's just the idea has started in the 1700s. Antoine de Olivet, 1767 to 1825, a partly biblical, partly neo-pagan reconstruction of the history of humanity. He relocates Atlantis away from Sweden and Spitzenberg. And for him, the white race of the north are going to become the Celtic or Scythian race. The black race lives in the south, where the Atlantean masters of the universe belong. So you have this separation. And this particular depiction, what this gentleman is saying that, hey, these northern races, they're not part of Atlantis, but they're going to conquer them. They're just going to mess them up. That's how awesome our people are. The rest of you are talking about how cool Atlanteans are for their civilization and technology sharing around the globe. Well, our ancestors are the ones that conquered them. You're welcome, is what he would say. Kershaw again, 2018. So here's the important one that I want to highlight on, and I know I'm going through this fast and I'm stuttering and blah, blah, blah. Sorry. 1784, Thomas Jefferson. I've seen a lot of comments online or comments in YouTube videos where people don't understand the harm of this belief system. We've already outlined how a lot of these folks are just claiming Atlantis or a lost civilization because they want specific pieces of property, control of people, control of resources. They're trying to work it into their laws and their government to justify what it is that they're doing in terms of colonizing, right? Thomas Jefferson, 1784. He's going to conduct the first scientific archaeological excavation in one of the mounds in Northeast America. It's purported that around him were mounds and Indians, Native Americans, and he was able to observe natives visiting one of the mounds. They had a ceremony, they left. This got him thinking that, hey, these guys might actually be the builders of these mounds and not some white race. So he conducts an excavation and essentially comes to the conclusion that, yeah, these mounds, they're made by the American Indians here. They're not from, these mounds are not from some lost white race. It's these guys. These guys are using them. They're still using them, right? But this information is ignored. The scientific information, the direct observations are ignored. Where have we seen people ignore direct physical evidence before, right? Last video. But it's sad. It's so sad that he we all know him as a smart individual. He does this dig, and the information, it's just ignored. It's just ignored, and it's too bad. And we see a lot of that today. Try and tell people the history of Atlantis hunting and lost civilization hunting. They don't want to listen. They don't care. They don't see how it's racist. They don't see its death and its destruction and the fact that there is a long history of it. And I think for a lot of people that maybe just watch a video or something every once in a while on lost civilizations, I don't think they know the history of it. And it's okay. It's okay just to, watch something to be entertained and and that's okay. A lot of the guys that are central to what's being written in books or a lot of the videos today, they know the history. They know the history. They're just plain dumb. They want those clicks. They want those book sales. They want those Patreon dollars. And not a lot we can do about it. At this point in American history, we've been fighting this stuff for 500 years. There's not a lot more we can do. But anyway, let's finish off this sad little chapter here. An inadvertent argument against the prevailing lost white race theory that the mounds were the work of an earlier, supposedly more sophisticated people killed off by the Indians. And what they mean by sophisticated people, white folk, white Atlanteans, white lost civilization folks from one of the 10 tribes, take your pick, it doesn't matter. It all turns into the same BS, right? So, science ignored, observations ignored. People will believe what they want to believe for political expedience, for greed, for land, whatever. 50 years into the future, Andrew Jackson, December 6, 1830, Indian Removal Act, expulsion and resettlement of southwestern Native American tribes. The Indians were neither innocent victims, according to him, nor first peoples, but perpetrators of what Jackson's modern admirers might call white genocide. Lost race of the mound builders exterminated by Indians. Brazier de Bourg is 16 when this happens. He will later visit Canada. He is no doubt aware of the Indian Removal Act and what happened after that. The warning signs to step away from this philosophy were everywhere. Were everywhere in history. Everywhere. He ignored them. Before de Bourg left Canada, he was already known as a liar, a guy that would write up fanciful stories before truth. So, yeah, as a priest, with these sort of things happening in the world, he's not such a good guy. He's not such a good guy. Anyway, just to hammer this home again, we have science that says, hey, wait, most likely not a lost white civilization that built these mounds, most likely Indians. 50 years in the future, people just don't give a damn. they're going to use this mythology to justify their actions. Sad. And now we come to Charles Etienne de Borg. We're just going to refer to him as the Borg. Yeah, Star Trek, Borg. 1814 to 1874. The only thing that he really does is with Atlantis moving all over the globe, from the Philippines to Indonesia, South China Sea, the North Pole, South Pole. From his perspective, from his writings, he's going to put Atlantis back in Mesoamerica. And Egypt and Mayan cultures are the descendants of Atlantis. See the Cares and Toltec. So he's going to latch on to the Toltec thing. And he's also going to latch on to the Mediterranean thing. He's got a group of white bearded men coming out of the east, and he's got some copper olive skinned people coming out of the west. So one's from the Mediterranean, one's European looking descendants, all Atlanteans, and they're going to come in and start civilizing the world, sharing knowledge, right? Borg is also famous for his atrocious fake translation of Landa's atrociously fake 1566 work on the Toronto Codex, in which Borg proclaimed that the Atlantean name for Atlantis was Mu in Mayan. It's also important to point out that the Borg, although some speak positively of him, that he was actually part of a colonizing expedition. That's how he first ended up in Central America. He was there to scope out property and write about the people so that France could colonize it. Yeah, so he's not just an innocent observer there. He was also upset that people were making fun of him for his notions of Atlantis. He was upset about his pay that the French government paid him. He was upset that his writings weren't more famous. Essentially what was happening is everybody back home in France, they had written this guy off as a kook. Nobody took him seriously. And that's okay, because before he ever left Canada, he was already known for lying and doing weird, unusual things. The Aryan laugh. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. But the Aryan laugh that Dan talks about when he says, hey, this guy was laughing at the Aryans because he knew it was the Maya. Dan injects that piece of information there in such a fashion that when he says Maya, I honestly think he wants you to think brown. That somehow Borg was trying to tell everybody that these brown Mayans were the true civilizers of the world. Yeah, that the Mayans were the true civilizers of the world. Unfortunately, the conversation he's referring to is about the Aryan language. Even Blavatsky, at the time, who was a noted racist, would describe Aryans, because Aryans at this time does not mean white. It doesn't mean white at this time. That's going to come later. Blavatsky, the known racist, she's quoted as saying, Aryans, now varying from dark brown, almost black, red, brown, yellow, down to the whitest creamy color, are yet all of one and same stock, the fifth root race. So when Dan says, oh, he's laughing at the Aryans, it was the Mayans, I think he's trying to trick you there. I saw that. He was like, I see what you did, dude. One of the other gross things that Borg does is he covers for Diego Landa. Landa's the book burner and killer. And essentially what Borg does is all these crimes that Landa did against the people in that part of the world, the destruction of their culture, the murders, the rapes, the burnings, that Landa helped cover for and create. Although he did save some people. If you converted to Christianity, he was willing to save you, right? Borg actually says, you know what? This guy wasn't that bad. If you judge him in terms of all the other men of his age, he was just like him. He was no different. But thank goodness that Landa, after he burned all of these books, he at least copied a couple of them down, and we have those to read today. Therefore, because Landa destroyed this culture, he wrote down this information that we get to read today. Therefore, Landa is now a hero. That's gross and disgusting. You kill, murder, rape, and steal from people. The books that you burned, you copied a portion of them, and now you're a hero. Fuck. He was literally, a savior of the Maya. That's gross. I don't know what kind of person does that, but that's the history of Central America. Gross. Again, all for finding lost civilizations, Atlantis. But let's get back to what Dibbles actually presents. What he brings to the table is not, Atlantis and Mesoamerica, Egypt, Maya, mother cultures to the rest of the world. What he actually does is he tries to use linguistic analysis to prove how old the Maya are, to prove how old it is, so that he can say, well, this is the origin. This is where Atlantis is. That's really what he brings to the table. It's not archaeology. It's his language analysis, which is extremely faulty. But it is what it is. And the only reason I keep mentioning this is because it's a language conversation. Dan wants you to believe that Dibbles is somehow a upstanding citizen. He says, no, it's the brown guys. He doesn't. So here's the entire paragraph from letter 1 of Dibbles from one of Dan's other videos. But as you can see, he's just saying, look, we can no longer deny that the science must also admit Indo-European languages. Now we're on Proto-Indo-European languages. She must also declare that there are no Indian nations in Europe. So people are just trying to figure out how old their language is, and this is what Dibbles is going to use to argue for Atlantis. He's going to do it badly, very badly, but that's what he's going to do. So there's no argument in this particular sentence about race. It's just about the age of what the languages are, and he's going to argue that the Mayan language is older than the Indo-European languages. The existence in Europe of pre-existing languages and peoples laughing at the Aryas. That's all it is. He's laughing at the age of the language. I just had to bring that up because I think I understand what Dan was trying to do when he was talking about that. Last comment on this is Dedunking likes to pretend that these folks received no criticism and were never shown the door. They were. These are not legitimate figures. Both Dibbles and Plongeon, they were laughed at. They were discredited. No one took them seriously. But for Dan, he's going to use them as legitimate folks in history to look to who are scientists. They weren't. Next slide. Okay, so to keep going here in the 1800s, Jules Verne, 1828 to 1905. He sees what's going on around him, all this crazy Atlantis hunting, lost civilization hunting. He writes 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in 1861. Yeah. And unlike everybody else, it turns out Jules Verne may have actually read the original Tale of Atlantis, because he puts Atlantis under the ocean. It sank. So he's got submarines going down there to find them, right? Anyway. 1800s, we've got Helena Blavatsky, 1831 to 1891. She ends up helping develop the Theosophical Society, weird group. Her book is titled Isis Unveiled, A Master Key to the Mysteries of Ancient and Modern Science, 1877. It includes the root races, yes, racism, and a cult in Atlantis. And, all these guys they're all reading themselves. This is all floating around. Like Plongeon will be, cited by Donnelly. Anyway, probably confusing. Again, this is just a list of some of the big players that were using Atlantis and Lost Civilization hunting to make themselves rich, make their countries rich, to justify what their countries were doing. Augustus Plongeon, 1826 to 1908, he would directly expand the work of Borg and add to the story of Mu, with the Princess Mu from Maya land, who would escape to Egypt, commission the Sphinx, and be recognized as the goddess Isis. In his story, the Yucatan was an Atlantean colony already established by the Borg and some others. In addition, he would conclude and promote that Jesus didn't cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" in Arabic, but rather, now, sinking black ink over nose in Mayan. See Kershaw for this, Kershaw 2018. Interesting stuff. So we already know that de Borg was part of a colonizing expedition. He's praising Landa. He doesn't actually think that the Mayans he encountered were the people that did all the pyramids around him. That was the olive-skinned people out of the west and the whites from the east. And the same with Plongeon. So, Vestiges of the Maya in 1881, Plongeon writes, "The dwarfish race is certainly easily distinguishable from the descendants of giants that tradition says once upon a time existed in the country, whose bones are yet found." So, when Plongeon is there, he's looking at these descendants of the Atlanteans. He's like, oh, my goodness. Certainly distinguishable from the descendants of the giants that tradition says they once upon a time existed. So yeah, don't ever let people tell you that de Borg and Plongeon were just, they were just normal guys and everything was cool and they weren't racist. No, they were racist. They were just white collar about it. They're not going to say overtly derogatory terms. You have to pay attention to what they write, like when they're calling people dwarves and things like that. Anyway, Ignatius Donnelly is going to follow with his book in 1882, a year after Vestiges of the Maya. And you can go read that Ignatius book yourself. I don't want to read any of it here.